Hi again, Social 30-1 here. Second set of sources this week on the topic of illiberalism, whereas last week we went after securities legislation, the Patriot Act, and so on. This week we'll go after different case studies in our look at illiberalism. So I'll give you a few seconds to study the source. There's actually a lot going on and some really key phrases I think we need to expand on. Let's see what you can conjure on your own first. Okay. Well, let's see what we can do with this source. So I think for sure we're thinking about our look at the American Civil Rights Movement. So you can probably, review those notes or have them on standby would help you understand this a lot better too. I think, well, first, Lyndon B. Johnson was an American president in the mid 1960s. It will actually be him that passes the Voter Rights Act in a couple of years from when he's giving this speech that will guarantee black people the right to vote in the southern states. So that is your setting. I'm looking at the date 1964, and I'm thinking that is right in the heart of the American Civil Rights Movement, and Johnson's going to have a big part to play in that. He starts off by saying, for half a century we've called upon unbounded invention and untiring industry. So when I see those two phrases, I'm thinking capitalism. America for a half a century, from early 1900 till when he's giving the speech 1960-ish, has relied on capitalism to uh, give its people a lot, an order of plenty for all of our people. So it's created an abundance of wealth and riches, but I'm not sure if it's for all American people. And the point of a source analysis is not necessarily that you critique it, but rather you can ponder it and say all people, if it was an order of plenty for all people, you wouldn't have economic marginalization. You wouldn't have political marginalization. And in the 1960s, you have both of those things. And in terms of the topic we're looking at, the civil rights movement, black people are economically marginalized in the South and they're politically marginalized in the South. Um, and maybe that's why he goes on to say the rest of the things that he has to say. They haven't established the order of plenty yet for all people. Challenge of the next half century is whether or not they can use this wealth and wisdom that was gained from the first half of the century to elevate their national life. In other words, give everyone a better life, advance the quality of their American civilization. You need to make some conjectures now on what do you think he means by that? What does he mean by elevate our national life? What does he mean by advance the quality of our American civilization? Given that it is the heart of the civil rights movement, and given with what he talks about later on, things like racial injustice and poverty, it's pretty obvious he's getting at the marginalization of black people in the American South. He's calling on the country to end that political and economic marginalization of black people, to advance the quality of their American civilization. So he's being very inclusive. He's saying that America is made up of everyone, regardless of race, creed, and so on, and he wants them all to enjoy this elevated national life. He doesn't want marginalization. In the third stanza, he goes on to say, the great society, and I find that very interesting. The great society. Clearly, he means America, and I think what he's getting at is that America, on the global level, should be judged as a great society. It's got political freedom, it's got economic freedom and opportunity. The American dream has come to America, and you will have the freedom to be whatever you want to be. It almost reads as though America is kind of a template for other civilizations on Earth. But for America to be that template, it needs abundance and liberty for all. It needs economic abundance, so no more economic marginalization and no more political marginalization. People should have economic freedom and opportunity. They should have political rights and freedoms. Everyone should have these rights. And only then can America be this template for the great society that the rest of the world can hold up and admire. He demands an end to poverty and racial injustice. And as soon as I see racial injustice, I'm thinking there is your clue to the American civil rights movement. If you hadn't figured it out yet, you would by this point. He's talking about the American civil rights movement. Specifically, he would be wanting to end the Jim Crow laws. He wants to end racial segregation. He wants no more political and economic marginalization. He hasn't done it yet, but in a couple of years he will pass the Voting Rights Act, which guarantees black people from the American South to vote in elections. And he goes on to say, we're totally committed to this, but that is just the beginning. And so you have to wonder, where does he want to go from there? Well, again, there is a little more conjecture. So actually a lot going on in that source. I would go back to my notes and quickly look them over. He talks about these things in 1964. So you might just establish why there was racial segregation in the states. You could quickly talk about the Civil War and how those even though the North won and abolished slavery, those feelings of resentment and ethnocentrism had never really gone away to the point that there was still segregation and racism in the American South. You might talk a bit about the efforts of Martin Luther King and others to end racial segregation and so on. You might mention Rosa Parks in 1955. So all of these things happened before uh, Johnson gave his speech, and you could quickly allude to them. You know, a lot of what he's talking about has already been attempted by Rosa Parks, by Martin Luther King, and you wouldn't, write a big essay about those examples, but you would quickly refer to them. You could refer to the Little Rock Nine. You could refer to the Stand in the Schoolhouse Door. You can talk about all of those really quick, or just one or two. You can just mention as saying, he's not inventing this. Lyndon B. Johnson was not the first person to have said or thought these things. Um, a lot of Americans had been trying to realize this for a few years before, but now it's the president that's saying it, and maybe it has a little more credence that goes with it. Maybe he can actually do something about these things. In terms of our links, well, for sure, I see rule of law. Lyndon Johnson will probably say for too long the American government has put itself above the rule of law, and they did not allow black people to vote, and they forcibly segregated them. That has to end right here and now. And he would say that we need to extend individual rights and freedoms to all people, um, regardless of race, etc., etc. And he would probably say as well they should enjoy economic freedom and opportunity. Um, to end economic marginalization. He might talk about self-interest. It could refer to the government should not be putting its self-interest first. It should be putting what is better for society instead of what is better for just the government. In terms of perspective, to finish off, Johnson would be challenging liberalism. He would be critiquing it and challenging and saying, look, I know we live in a democratic country. Everyone knows America is a democracy, but it's not democratic enough. It's not liberal enough because a lot of our people, black people, can't vote and are economically marginalized. And he wants to end that. So for sure, he'd be challenging, critiquing liberalism. I can't think of much else to do with the source. This, by the way, is a former diploma source. I'm trying to think. I think this one was given, I think it was January of 2019. So this one is actually quite recent, as recent as you can get, I guess. A really good source. I like it. There's a lot going on, a lot of different layers to that source. And again, I urge you to keep listening to the daily source analysis. It's a very good way to learn and enhance your understanding of what's going on. Thanks for listening.